Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Danny Rogers, the Editor-in-Chief of PRWeek, and I'm joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Siobhan Holt, PRWeek's news editor, of course. Hi, Siobhan.
Hi.
And Evie Barrett, our senior reporter. Hello to you both. Are you winding down nicely now for it's Christmas?
We'd like to, but the PR industry really isn't letting us, is it, guys?
No, not at all. We'll get there eventually.
Yeah,
I
nearly
did say
there.
that tongue-in-cheek, actually, because I realised that none of us are winding down whatsoever. Anyway, so this week actually brought a bombshell news story, a colossal merger in the marketing services industry, including PR, of course. So Omnicom is set to buy holding company rival IPG, which will create the world's biggest marketing communications group, with a combined revenue of $25.6 billion. I think the story broke on Sunday night. I think the Wall Street Journal broke it.
Yes, yeah.
But pretty much all the nationals were on the case by Monday morning. And we put a story up on Sunday night, which was good.
Yes, Mr. Harrington spotted that.
Yeah, well done, John. So between these two companies, they own some of the world's biggest PR agencies. Omnicom's stable includes FleishmanHillard, Ketchum and Porter Novelli, while IPG owns the Weber Shandwick Collective, Golin and several more. The combined PR business, in fact, will have annual revenues of around $2.8 billion. So there's lots to discuss here. But firstly, what were your initial reactions? Were you surprised by the news?
Well, we'd had a hunch, hadn't we, that we might get big news along these lines at some point. But regarding the timings, great on a Sunday evening for us all, and obviously the two holding companies being involved, that was a surprise. Although this deal had been rumoured for a few months. But on the analyst call that was in one of our stories, Omnicom chairman and CEO John Wren said there were more synergies between Omnicom and IPG than there had been during, say, Omnicom's discussions about a possible merger with Publicis back in 2013. Evie, what did you think?
It's one of those rumours that's apparently been swirling for a while. I mean, long before I've been writing about the PR industry, but you always assume that you'll get a bit more warning and whispers before it actually happens. The thing that surprised me the most is the fact that it's been billed as an acquisition rather than a merger, and that some of the bosses have been referring to the combined business as the new Omnicom. I just think IPG is such a huge business that it's hard to picture it disappearing completely into Omnicom, but appreciate that obviously it's more nuanced than it seems from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, I believe the shareholding is about 60% Omnicom, 40% IPG. Is that right? So it definitely is an Omnicom takeover, even though it's being described as a merger. Yeah, it's definitely a big story. It's interesting for me because back in 2013, when I was editor of Campaign back then, we covered the attempted merger of Omnicom and Publicis at that time. And that was the last time that any of the big four marketing groups tried to merge. And that one was a bit of a mess, frankly. After many months of negotiations, they called it off. They couldn't decide who was going to run what.
Right.
And all sorts of problems arose. So hopefully for Omnicom's sake, this one goes a little better. So what have industry figures been saying about why this is happening and why now?
So one agency boss, Tim Dyson, who's the CEO of Next 15, he described it as feeling like a land grab in advance of the disruption of AI and what that's going to generate. Compared it to car companies, so Stellantis being one that comes to mind, and the idea of being ahead of the electric car wave, that they wanted to scale to deal with the big shift ahead. And, you know, we have examples of that with like Tesla. That is one car brand that is definitely crushed all of them in the transition. And I think it could be a warning, especially, you know, about upstart rivals that don't get their act together.
Yeah, it's a really strong point. And on a similar note, someone who I spoke to suggested that tech and data is really the most important thing for the holding companies. They used Publicis as an example of that and said that the creative elements are far less important in the grand scheme of things. So it's likely that some PR or ad agencies could be sold in order to make these tech investments, much like we've seen with WPP selling off FGS Global recently. We also had a story from PRWeek US hearing Richard Edelman's thoughts on the situation. He said that the deal puts huge pressure on WPP, giving it a new, larger and higher valued competitor. He argues that it's not about being the biggest and that he, quote, likes the acquisition for Edelman because it gives them more of an advantage by having an independent muscle factor. That said, David Gallagher, who is ex-boss of Ketchum for Europe, and Paul Tafe, who is chief exec of Anisio, both think that the holding company's media assets are the priority here, so maybe the impact of PR agencies shouldn't be overstated. Speaking to us for an analysis piece that I wrote, Paul Tafe said that from a comms perspective, the merger doesn't add much value as both companies already have far more reach and breadth than most clients need. He said the real key will be to look for what synergies they post as being possible, as that will tell you what harm will befall IPG.
Yes, thanks for that. It does amuse me a bit when rival agencies start giving all the reasons why it won't work. Funny that. And when people like Richard Edelman say, I'd rather be the best than the biggest, you've got to believe me that what they really mean is I want to be the best and the biggest.
Yes.
Yeah.
They all want to be the biggest, but anyway, that's just corporate life. Let's look at the PR agencies involved in this merger. What does the industry think is likely to happen, assuming the deal goes through in terms of these agencies?
I mean, agency mergers or sell-offs could be on the cards, and according to a few of the industry figures we've been speaking to, that's definitely been the messaging that they've been putting forward. So Jim Donaldson, who former UK chief at FleishmanHillard, that's now a very prominent advisor, said if he were a betting man, he could see one or two of the larger full-service PR agencies being sold off to both take advantage of the return that would bring to shareholders, but also to allow the remaining agencies to bring together expertise and double down as part of more of an enlarged group. I mean, the other option, he said, is also a merger between agencies, but he said that is complex, often messy, and makes client conflicts even more problematic, and he is a person that will know that.
Yeah, from the chats I've been having, someone suggested that in terms of PR agency mergers, Weber and either Fleischman or Ketchum could be a logical combination. Mm-hmm. They said that many of the PR agencies are, quote, very different beasts, so not all of them would work together. For example, merging a Weber and a Portland could seem dilutive, in their words. But again, that's not to say that any of this will actually happen, just an observation.
Yeah, and of course, we've seen quite punchy examples of both this year. At WPP, we've had the merger of BCW and H&K to form Burson, and also the sale of FGS Global to private equity. PR agency mergers within holding companies are hardly new. Omnicom did itself a few years ago with Fleischman and Fishburne, and FGS is a product of several mergers. Mm-hmm. But maybe the fact as well that WPP has been doing so quite actively recently, and not just in PR, and has been highlighting the money saved, this could be appealing. Omnicom says it expects to get annual cost savings of $750 million due to the merger, and combining agencies is obviously a way to save on the back office costs. Mm. And then regarding a sell-off idea that you suggested there, the sale price of FDS was quite high, and that business has been consistently outperforming WPP's PR division. It's also had a significantly higher profit margin than average, but do Omnicom or IPG have an equivalent? I was wondering this. I'm not sure they actually do. That's not to say that they don't have great agencies, but I wonder more if we'll see more maybe groupings like we do with the Weber Shandwick Collective, as the new holding company looks to position its PR agencies and integrated assets that could be spun off. I mean, that's all merely speculation, but they're all options that they could try.
I mean, they're bound to be inspired by the creation of Burson. Looking ahead to the agency environment more generally, we had a comment from Rachel Sansom, who is boss of Havas Fred. She predicts that we'll be left with a world dominated by group Goliaths and fame-driving creative shops with nothing much in between, which is an extension of a trend that we've already started to see. But I think it really emphasises how mid-sized agencies are going to struggle further to prove themselves.
It's certainly a theory, but it's a theory I've heard many times over the past decade. Rachel's point that we're going to get this polarisation and that mid-sized agencies will fail and you'll either be big or you'll be a hot shop. And yet, if you look back over the past decade or so, mid-sized agencies have done very well in the UK. I mean, mostly independent consultancies like Brands to Life or Hanover, who were independent, or Headland in corporate, or indeed Freud's or Hope and Glory, who are more in the consumer space. They've seen really impressive growth. So, yes, of course, some of them will sell eventually to bigger organisations, but some won't. And they continue to win lots of awards, these mid-sized agencies, and attract really good people. So I think there could still be a future for your mid-sized consultancies, but that's just a personal viewpoint. We will see. Right, so moving on from the big merger story, this week's podcast was going to be about PRWeek's UK Communicators of the Year project, which we've been running for the last few weeks until Omnicom and IPG so rudely made us change course at the last minute. So yes, in recent days, PRWeek has been running down our list of people we think have shown the very best comms abilities in 2024. Because it's Communicator of the Year, we are excluding journalists and PR people and also politicians who arguably it's their job to be communicators. We're looking at communicators outside those communications jobs and seeing who's done the best job. So I thought we could take a couple of people each and discuss why they deserve to be on this year's list. So firstly, Siobhan.
So someone that stood out to me, especially at the moment where we've had a year where we haven't had that many bosses speak out on big issues. We really actually struggled when we were going through the communicators list this year to find some really prominent leaders for that reason, because they don't want to stick their neck out and give a strong opinion. But one that actually did was Julian Duckerton, the CEO of Superdry, for those that don't know. He's been actually quite good at criticising the tax arrangement, shall we say, of Shein, which is the online fashion retailer. He's also come across well during rounds of interviews with national, regional, as well as business press this year, which obviously that can be quite ignored sometimes, trade press. So we were quite impressed that he was really factoring that into his PR and comms strategy. And he was talking a lot about it when the group was being delisted. Another prominent person that stood out to me was the actor Andrew Garfield. And he's on the list largely for a viral clip of him discussing grief after the sad loss of his mother. He was on with Elmo, bless him, on Sesame Street. And it may sound a bit odd, but it was a really touching film and it exploded on social media. And Garfield's been quite prominent in doing this before, where he's spoken about grief and sort of said that people, if they get upset about the loss of someone, shouldn't view it in a sad way, but as a way of remembering that person. And it really hit home, and it was a really strong communication message. So those were the two that stood out to me this year.
Yeah, Andrew Garfield is a great shout. I think he's come across as really genuine. Someone else who's achieved that, albeit in a completely different way, is Charlie XCX. She's been absolutely everywhere this year, as I'm sure you'll all know. Everyone has wanted to jump on the bandwagon there. Aside from her album, Brat, which she released in June, I think her personality played a huge role in her popularity. She really hasn't censored herself in interviews with the media, which not many big stars can say. She's not been afraid to embrace her flaws. She explained that being a brat is all about being messy and confrontational, but she added that you act like a brat when you're feeling insecure. So she's kind of owning it, but admitting to her own flaws too. She addressed a lot of these insecurities in her lyrics, which I think made a lot of people feel quite endeared to her, and she seemed quite relatable as an artist, hence why her music's resonated so strongly.
It's also supposed to be a very good album, isn't it? It's got very good reviews in the music media as well.
Yeah, Grammy nominations.
Yes, without doubt. Well, Charlie XCX's year to a certain extent. I was going to call out a couple of people, unfortunately, really, because it's been a year of sort of sad news, particularly regarding cancer. And, we've had Kate Middleton, of course, who's communicated brilliantly about her cancer diagnosis earlier this year. And indeed her treatment as well. She talked about that. And then, of course, Sir Chris Hoy, who was nearly I think it was number 2 in our list.
Yeah, we had a big debate, didn't we?
Yeah, it was a tough one, but Sir Chris Hoy has been amazing. So brave, talking about his terminal cancer diagnosis and all the work he's done for charity over the years, and he's still determined to help people even now he's got his diagnosis. And I don't know if you saw the meeting between Kate Middleton and Sir Chris Hoy recently at the church service, Notre Dame, I think it was.
Yes, yeah.
And it was a very moving moment. Two brilliant and very brave communicators, I think. But on the corporate side of things, I was going to call out Alex Mahon, the chief exec of Channel 4, who's actually been in our top 20 communicators for 2 years running now. And this year she's up to number 7. And she's had 7 years now running the UK's only state-owned but commercially funded broadcaster, Channel 4. And she continues to impress with her communications. And it's been a tough year for Channel 4 because Mahon had to lead from the front despite a difficult advertising market. And they've sold off their London HQ. They're making cuts. They're creating new roles up in the north away from London. So she's done brilliantly. And of course, This summer we had the Paralympic Games in Paris, and they're the exclusive broadcast partner and champion of that movement, and they were once again a big success. And during the Games in September, Marn worked with the British ambassador to throw a huge garden party at the British Embassy in Paris, which I actually went to. It's amazing, impressive exercise in soft power, so credit to her. But let's discuss the person at number one, Siobhan.
I feel like we should have a drum roll for this. So this year, we've gone for Sir Alan Bates. I don't think he needs any introduction, but I will do anyway. He's the man, obviously, that led the campaign for justice for sub-postmasters. And that followed, of course, the hit ITV show Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, which I think aired in around January. It was quite early on in the year. But it obviously helped propel the campaign, which has been simmering for several years, into the public consciousness. And it's a fascinating case study, really, of how the worlds of entertainment, traditional and social media and political campaigning can play off each other. But kudos to Bates himself, who's shown the difficult knack of being able to communicate his expertise on a topic when having a real personable human touch. I think that really came across. And as I said, it was very successful, with both Sunak and Starmer government saying they will act for the victims. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts were on the winner this year. We had quite a lot of debate about it, didn't we, in the office?
Yeah, I mean, compared to Richard Walker last year and Mick Lynch in 2022, to me, it didn't feel like there was such an obvious choice for the top spot. Clearly, there were plenty of contenders, all the people we've just listed, but I wasn't sure who had stood out enough to be number one. You're right, though. I think the post office scandal really permeated all corners of the media and the entertainment world in the UK, so it does make sense to go with the person at the heart of that. We see plenty of true stories turned into TV dramas, but this one really had an impact on the public because people could empathise with the human story at the heart of it. So kudos to Alan Bates.
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary, guys. And it's a strange one, isn't it? Because Sir Chris Hoy, who was a close contender, that story was right towards the end of the year. The Post Office was right at the beginning of the year, as you say. And yet somehow it still feels like the big story of the year, Post Office, and it's still rumbling on, as you say. So I think we made the right decision. But credit to everyone who's been in our list. It's a really good list of communicators this year. So that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. Thanks to Siobhan and Evie for all your insights today. If you have enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PRWeek's Beyond the Noise podcast, and hopefully make it a 5-star review. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.